What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here with a look at the Week 7 main slate of the NFL season. We have 10 games for the main slate here on FanDuel and DraftKings, so we're going to be going over some top plays, strategies, and lineup advice for daily fantasy contests, specifically on DraftKings, but I will mix in FanDuel a little bit more than I have been to this point in the season for you all. And what you see on the screen is my favorite play of the week, Kenneth Walker III, the starting running back for the Seattle Seahawks. If you've been watching the show for a while, you know that I like to start by looking at the biggest favorites on the board in betting markets. It's a great way to tell which running backs are going to be in favorable game scripts, so we can build lineups around these players, particularly in low risk, but high risk as well. Walker has one of the safest roles on this slate because Seattle is favored by 7 points at home against the Arizona Cardinals this week, and he is facing a rush defense that has graded out as the 4th worst rush defense in the NFL according to DVOA on the season. Seattle also has a top 10 run blocking offensive line by adjusted line yards, and even though Walker doesn't really have a tremendous role in the passing game, 2nd worst in the league defending running backs in the passing game this year as well. So Ken Walker, my favorite way to start off a lineup this week. I think he's the number one core play you want to consider in low risk contests especially. Now, looking at the other big favorites that are on the board here in week number 7, we have James Cook and the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are favored by 8 points, actually the biggest favorite on the board. The concern with James Cook is that he is not dominating the role in the running game as much as some of the other running backs we can consider on this slate. More on that in a little bit. Latavius Murray is doing just enough, particularly down by the goal line, to be annoying in fantasy football. So James Cook may not be the strongest, safest play in low risk that we can consider. Probably a good tournament play, though, given the favorable game environment we are expecting for Buffalo. Biggest problem with the Bills is that the production may very well come from Josh Allen and the passing game, which may be something that we do want to play this week, which may push us off of James Cook in low risk. But Cook in a good game script nonetheless here in week number 7. Finally, we have the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 5.5 points at home against the Los Angeles Chargers. And I think Isaiah Pacheco will prove to be the 2nd most popular running back play alongside Kenneth Walker for some of the reasons that I was just describing here. Unlike James Cook, Pacheco actually has a really strong role in the Chiefs offense right now. Jahmyr McKinnon has not had as dynamic of a role as we saw at the end of 2022 just yet. So we can safely pencil in Isaiah Pacheco for a really strong number of opportunities against a defense that is actually the 5th worst defending running backs in the passing game, and also extremely below average defending running backs in the passing game, 5th worst in that category as well. You might be wondering a little bit about what the touch distribution has looked like for the Chiefs at running back over the last few weeks of play. Isaiah Pacheco has been responsible for just over 60% of team carries and just under 10% of team targets in the last 3 weeks of play for Kansas City. This is bell cow running back territory. Outside of considering Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jahmyr McKinnon in single game showdown DFS environments, these two players have really not been super relevant as far as fantasy football is concerned on larger classic slates like this. Isaiah Pacheco, really the only Chief running back worth considering in your lineups in both low and high risk contests this week. Now, looking at the Occupy model and sorting by projected ownership, this is our projected ownership around Friday, 11:30 in the mornings when I'm doing this video here. We have Ken Walker projected for the highest potential ownership on DraftKings right now. Pacheco comes in 5th highest on DraftKings, a little lower on FanDuel. The other running backs to consider on this slate that I also think are in extremely good spots to succeed: Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders are favored by 2 points against the Bears. And then Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions in a game against the Baltimore Ravens, where they're actually 3-point underdogs. Jacobs is another one of my favorite running back plays this week. The Bears defense may prove to be on the field quite a bit this weekend because the Bears are going to be forced on offense to start their backup quarterback. Justin Fields will not play. Undrafted rookie free agent Tyson Bagent out of Division II Shepherd University is going to be starting this game. Bears are the underdog side for a reason, folks. Jacobs has had a really, really dynamic role for the Raiders, seeing over 20% of team targets, seeing over 70% of team carries, also in true bell cow territory. The only thing that's really a concern for Jacobs is that the Raiders have had pretty poor run blocking year to date. This is an average matchup in the running game. An extremely above average matchup for Jacobs in the passing game, which is encouraging. The Bears have been the worst defense defending running backs in the passing game so far on the season. This may be a situation where the Raiders' backup quarterback, because Jimmy Garoppolo also is not going to play this week, will lean on Jacobs heavily both on the ground and through the air. So I like getting Jacobs into lineups with Pacheco and Walker as my third favorite running back. If you were pressing me for what I really think is the best way to play this slate, it's definitely Josh Jacobs, Kenneth Walker III, and Isaiah Pacheco as the best running back options to consider. Jahmyr Gibbs is expected at this point to be the number one running back for the Lions this week. David Montgomery's already been ruled out. Craig Reynolds has been on the injury report. Gibbs has missed a couple of games recently and is on the injury report, but it actually looks like he is trending to play against the Ravens. Gibbs has returned to practice this week. He's had some positive improvement with his hamstring injury, and the last update that we have within the last few minutes is that Gibbs has actually been given the green light by head coach Dan Campbell to play on Sunday. We only have one example of a game this year where Gibbs started as the early down running back. It was week number 3 against the Falcons. This was a game that David Montgomery missed earlier in the year. Gibbs that week had 17 carries and 2 targets. Very dynamic usage, something that we love to see, especially at a low price tag. Pretty close in salary to Kansas City's Isaiah Pacheco. So I do think Gibbs will prove to be one of the better plays on this slate as well, and should be in what is now the big 4 on this slate of Jacobs, Walker, Pacheco, and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think these are the best plays to consider on this slate. Now, there's one giant question mark of a situation at running back that I'm sure everyone who's been following the news this week wants to hear more about. The Los Angeles Rams have been a little bit of a roller coaster at running back this season. The first thing that everyone wants to assume about this trio of running backs behind Rivers and Kyren Williams is that rookie 6th round draft pick Zach Evans is going to be the first player up to get the crack at the apple here to start for the Los Angeles Rams. Unfortunately, this week in some of his press conferences, Sean McVay has thrown a little bit of cold water on that assumption. Basically saying things like, it shouldn't necessarily be assumed to be a lock. Paraphrasing here, of course, shouldn't be assumed to be a lock that Zach Evans is going to be the guy that we go with. We've got other running backs that we like on the roster. Royce Freeman on the practice squad, a veteran in the NFL, may mix in. They just claimed Myles Gaskin off waivers, off the practice squad from the Minnesota Vikings. He's a running back that has some experience in a similar offensive system. Gaskin spent the preseason with the Vikings. The Vikings are coached by Kevin O'Connell, former offensive coordinator for Sean McVay and the Rams. The Rams also re-signed Darrell Henderson, who at this point a year ago was the starting running back for the Los Angeles Rams. So I don't know if we can safely consider any Rams running back in low-risk contest this week. We are still projecting somewhat high ownership for Zach Evans in the model right now, but absent like a really strong report from a trusted beat writer like Jordan Rodriguez, who covers the Rams for The Athletic, or the Rams themselves coming out and saying, we're going to be starting Zach Evans this week, I think we're going to have to hit the pause button here and look at some of the guys I've talked about throughout the beginning of this video for our low-risk contests at running back. Now, other than running backs that the model ranks extremely highly, that we think are going to be incredibly popular this week, there are other ways, obviously, to look at what's going to be popular in low-risk contests this week. We like to look at betting market data. In addition to the spreads and betting markets, we obviously pay close attention to the totals. We only have one game with a total over 45 points this week. It's the Chiefs and the Chargers at 48.5 is how we have it right now. Second highest, Green Bay and Denver at 44.5, and Arizona and Seattle are 44 points as far as totals are concerned. Those are the 3 highest totals on the board. Highest implied team totals, we have Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs with a slate high 27-point implied team total. We have Kenneth Walker's Seattle Seahawks right behind them with a 26-point implied team total. The Buffalo Bills are the 3rd highest with 24.25 implied points in betting markets this week. And finally, we have the Los Angeles Rams in their matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers at home with the 4th highest implied team total on this slate. So these are the offensive environments, the teams we should be considering plays from for the rest of our low-risk lineups, right? I think at wide receiver, the number one place to go for your first receiver to consider behind this group is the affordable Joshua Palmer with the Los Angeles Chargers. I think a lot of people have been expecting Quentin Johnston to emerge as the secondary wide receiver next to Keenan Allen, given the high draft capital that the Chargers invested in him back in April. It has not been the case. We basically hit the floor last week on Monday Night Football with 2 targets, 0 catches, 0 receptions, 0 touchdowns. Tony Snell meme, right, from Quentin Johnston in that game against Dallas. Joshua Palmer, however, has continued to run the most routes right alongside Keenan Allen and continues to see a lot of opportunity to produce. He hasn't necessarily hit his ceiling yet, so not only is Joshua Palmer going to be a popular play this week because of the price, because of the game environment against the Kansas City Chiefs, believe it or not, he is also featured on our underperforming wide receiver list for week number 7. That's a perfect storm of opportunity that we should take advantage of, and we should be playing Joshua Palmer in the majority of our lineups, but especially in low-risk contests in FanDuel and DraftKings this week. And that gets us a nice little mini stack here in our lineups in week number 7 from the highest total game of the week, Chiefs and Chargers, 48.5 points. Other wide receivers that will prove popular on the week, if we go into the Occupy model and we sort by projected ownership on DraftKings, we have Zay Flowers from the Baltimore Ravens, number 2 right now, and obviously Cooper Kupp from the Los Angeles Rams. Kupp has seen a 38% target share over the last 2 weeks since we're joining the starting lineup. Puka Nacua has seen a 31% target share. These guys are combining for basically 70% of the targets from Matthew Stafford. But I think Cooper Kupp is a play that's definitely worth getting into your lineups if you can make it work at his high salary. At the quarterback position, obviously we can consider Mahomes playing on the highest implied team total offense. We already have a piece of Seattle with Kenneth Walker, so I don't think Geno Smith makes sense in low risk. I think that's too much Seattle. Buffalo, we've got Josh Allen against the Patriots. A little cheaper than Patrick Mahomes. Their implied team total about 3 points lower than Kansas City's, but a little bit more of rushing floor from Allen, so he's interesting. Stafford from the Rams, probably the most affordable in this group with their high implied team total. None of these guys are my favorite play in low risk this week, though. I am expecting Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens to be extremely popular in low risk contests this week. Our model agrees. Lamar Jackson is our number 1 play on the board for DraftKings this week, specifically because of that low $7,600 salary compared to the Herberts and Mahomes and Allens of the slate, who are a few $100s more expensive. Jackson may prove to be a very interesting play given the salary savings here on DraftKings for low risk contests, so I'm happy to play him here. And our projected ownership has him right there alongside Josh Allen and Geno Smith as 2 of the most popular quarterback plays on this slate that you can consider. And while it's not required to stack in low risk contests, because Zay Flowers is going to be so popular at wide receiver this week, you obviously can do that with Lamar. Jahmyr Gibbs, one of my favorite running backs on the slate, not in this particular type of build so far, but obviously playable in a lot of different lineup builds. You start to see that Ravens and Lions can also be a very popular game stack that we can play in high risk contests. But again, as far as low risk is concerned, Palmer from the Chargers I think is a really good play. Zay Flowers is going to be played pretty heavily. And then $3,800 per player remaining. How do we get where we need to go to finish off this lineup? There's 2 things you should be aware of. The number 1 thing is that the Seattle Seahawks defense is going to be the most popular defense play on this slate as the biggest favorite. A little bit of a mispricing here on DraftKings, just $3,200. Not the most expensive defense, pretty reasonable to get them into your lineup. I think you do want to play them in low risk. Got that correlation with the starting running back as well. We're up to $4,100 per player remaining. At tight end, and in this type of build, you're kind of pushed off of doing this. Travis Kelce, obviously the number 1 receiving threat for the Chiefs. Mark Andrews, right up there as a top 2 receiving threat for Lamar Jackson. These guys are going to be pretty popular in general in DFS this week. But if you're playing low risk the way that I have advised for here, you're going to need a cheaper tight end. There's 2 that stand out this week. Luke Musgrave from the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay back on the main slate after their bye week. The Denver Broncos have been pretty poor on defense. That's been pretty well celebrated amongst the analyst community this year. They're the 2nd worst defense defending the tight end. So you can get him in here at $3,300, and that leaves you $4,900 for your final wide receiver. You can even go a little cheaper than Musgrave, though. You can play Michael Mayer of the Las Vegas Raiders, who has finally started to emerge. 6 targets last week against the New England Patriots. Just $2,700 here on DraftKings. Michael Mayer is going to be a play that the field is on because of the salary savings. That gives you $5,500 to get your final wide receiver into a low risk lineup this week, and there are plenty of guys in this range that are playable. So I do think this is where you will see the field gravitate to, and this is one of the weeks where the low risk lineup actually looks pretty similar over on FanDuel. We can get a lot of the same plays in here, have just over $5,400 per player remaining for a couple of wide receivers and a defense. Really not a tremendously different slate, at least as far as low risk is concerned on FanDuel and DraftKings. You can land on a lot of the same things that our model thinks is correct on either site this week, which is pretty nice in my opinion. Now in high risk contests, Jackson, Zay Flowers, easy pivots here to get to a high risk lineup that we feel pretty good about. I could take Josh Jacobs out. I could get Jahmyr Gibbs in here. I've got a Ravens 2-1 in here already. Can we get to Mark Andrews with $3,600 left at wide receiver? Can probably play a cheaper defense and get to another wide receiver in this lineup. This is a very viable way to build. So you can use Gibbs as a bringback in a Ravens 2-0 or 3-0. I have a 3-0 on the screen right now. You could play Evans as a cheap running back. You could play Amon-Ra St. Brown at wide receiver as the preferred Lions bring back if you want. You just have to play like a minimum price defense, a really cheap wide receiver to make something like this work. But it's on the table. It's doable in high risk contests. I like the Baltimore side better than the Detroit side in this game. I'm not sure I will stack the Detroit side, but I can definitely see the bringbacks with the Ravens favored at home against the Detroit Lions here in week 7. Now the best game in stack environment is clearly the Chiefs and the Chargers. I don't think there's much of a debate around this. The only debate is how do we get to it in our lineup. And I think by far the most popular way people are going to do it is Mahomes, Kelsey, and Joshua Palmer, who is the number 1 highest projected owned wide receiver on the week. I think this 2-1 is probably the most popular way people are going to stack in small field definitely this week, but probably in high risk as well. We'll see a lot of ownership on these 3 plays. We can get our core around it. Preference being Kenneth Walker III at running back. You can use the running back in your stack. I would consider this more of a 2-1 with Pacheco added to it, even though they're on the same team. But similar to last week with playing Raheem Mostert in addition to Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill from the Dolphins, you're looking at locking up the most points on the slate. In betting markets, Chiefs with the highest implied team total. As long as we assume that Vegas is correct about that, we can get pretty good exposure to all of the different ways that we expect the Chiefs to score fantasy points and touchdowns this week. The ground, the air, and hopefully receiving them with Travis Kelce. The problem with doing this is having just $39.50 per player remaining with 4 spots to fill. So you're definitely going to need a cheap defense. Even though I do like Lamar Jackson in low risk, I like Lamar Jackson in high risk. If you're not playing any Ravens players, the Lions defense once again ranks pretty highly in our model this week. Lions defense projects to be one of the 3 highest owned defenses on the slate this weekend on DraftKings, so you can side with projected ownership. You can have a few more dollars to work with in your lineups this week, but this is pretty tight as far as salary is concerned, and we can already see if we want to upgrade from Palmer to Keenan Allen, going to be virtually impossible, at least approaching it this way, prioritizing some of the higher upside running back plays on the board, right? I think this is a build where you can take your shot on Zach Evans at running back from the Los Angeles Rams because it brings up our average salary remaining for the final 2 spots, and we can probably find some things that we like there doing it that way. I think if you creatively deploy Evans, as long as he gets you that 7 to 10 fantasy points at the minimum price, there are ways for you to win as long as your other players hit their true ceiling. Now, another way that you can play the Chiefs and the Chargers game is obviously stacking the underdog side. It's going to be lower owned, but Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Joshua Palmer, Pacheco at running back as the bring back probably is the most affordable way to play this. And when you build this way, you're expecting the Chargers passing attack to pop off, and hopefully we get a lot of the variance in the ground with the touchdowns and the fantasy points through Pacheco, and this gives you the most salary dollars remaining to try to maximize around this, but still just 42.66. Chargers Chiefs very, very hard to build around in week number 7. And to be honest, even though our model is high on Chargers Chiefs, at least at quarterback with Herbert 3rd and Mahomes 6th on this slate, this is probably the main reason why our model is actually pushing us towards stacking the Ravens, maybe even stacking Jared Goff, some gross things like Gardner Minshew. I think just to keep it simple and not to spoil too much from beyond the model when Brian and Moose stream this weekend and talk about best tournament plays, this expensive salary for Chiefs and Chargers is a big reason why our model seems to prefer other things to this week. But for me, my number 1 game stack of the week is Chiefs and Chargers. I do think exploring ways to make this fit are extremely important. We already know that at the tight end position, the field is somewhat going to be punting with either Meyer or Luke Musgrave, and that's one way for us to get our salary back up to a reasonable level for the final two plays we want. So that's just a little bit on how I'm looking at week number 7 of the NFL season here on DraftKings. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. We really appreciate every single time one of you engages with the channel and consumes our content. The NBA season starts next week, and we're going to be having a ton of NBA videos on this channel, live streams, pre-recorded uploads. If you enjoyed what we were doing last year with NBA, we're going to be doing more of the same and even more here in the 23-24 NBA season. If you want more NFL content, obviously we have that coming for the rest of the regular season and postseason as well. We'd really appreciate it if you guys could give us a thumbs up on the video. If you subscribe to the channel, that is the best way for you to get notified when we have new content that is uploaded for you right away. And given the fact that we're going to start uploading probably multiple videos a day with multiple sports starting up again with NBA and NFL competing for eyeballs in the same days of the week, right? Being subscribed is going to be the best way for you to know when we have new stuff for you, just because of the way the YouTube algorithm works. So we'd really appreciate it if you could click that subscribe button. Good luck in week number 7, folks. I will be back next week to talk to you about week number 8 in the NFL.